All right, welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us. It's April 14th. It's 414 Day in Milwaukee, which is a celebration that we have here because our area code is 414. So happy 414 Day to you all. This is our webinar on making sense of ESG. So again, welcome. I'm going to start by just giving a real brief overview of WSBC. I know about half of you are members and the other half are not. So just gonna let you know who we are. Our mission is to advance sustainable principles and practices forward through the power of business. We do this through educating, through webinar series like this, through our annual conference. We also help measure and improve sustainability outcomes and help connect or facilitate connection between sustainability and business professionals. We are owned and operated by WMEP Manufacturing Solutions. It's about 3.5 years we've been a part of that organization. Let's see, if you could go ahead and mute yourself. So just a quick overview of programs. WSBC runs programs. Our primary program is our membership program that gets you access to our Green Masters program. You can become a member as an individual or as a business. And our Sustainable Business Awards will open June 1st this year. So be on the lookout for our Sustainable Business Awards. We really have programs that help you elevate sustainability in your organization. Whether that's sort of the Green Masters program I call sort of the self-serve model, where 21st Century Pathways is a little bit more of a hand-holding model. We really work as a cohort and a team to help you set your goals and priorities and material metrics that matter to your company. And so I mentioned WSBC is a part of WMEP, so that's sort of our service arm of the organization. And really our specialty areas in supporting businesses are around water stewardship and greenhouse gas, as well as ESG strategy or sustainability strategy. And we also are a trained thesis provider. So we have 2 consultants on staff that work with the thesis tool if you are a consumer good product company selling to any large company like Walmart, Kroger, that sort of thing. So those are sort of our areas of expertise. I already mentioned you can become a member as a business, individual, or an affiliate. That's the nonprofit. So if you're not a member, I invite you to join us. I do have exciting news also. Our conference date has been set for this year. It will be our 15th annual conference. So we're very excited to be celebrating at Lambeau Field this year. And outside of the norm, it's going to be in November instead of December this year. So save the date for November 15th. We'll be doing tours and having our awards reception hosted at Myron Construction in Titletown. And then the conference will be on Wednesday, November 16th at Lambeau. Between now and then, we have a lot going on. It's Earth Month, or Earth Day is next week. And so we have 3 events that we're going to be at in the next weeks. Eco Open House, which is Evolution Marketing's Open House in Neshota. That's Friday next week. We'll be at, Jessica Stoll and I will be at Rock the Green next weekend in Milwaukee. That's a sort of zero waste festival. That's going to be at the Harley Museum. And then I'll also be at the Transportation and Innovation Expo the following week. And then we have some member events coming up. Connection, this is sort of our networking event on May 4th. And then 2 webinars co-hosted with the Energy Program of Wisconsin on energy efficiency in commercial sites and industrial sites in May. So you can find all that information at wisconsinsustainability.com, upcoming events. So you didn't come here today to listen to me talk. You came to hear a really great conversation around making sense of environmental, social, and governance, ESG. So I'm pleased to introduce our speakers to you today. Our moderator is our founder, Mr. Tom Eggert. Jean Burns-Frank and Brenda Sargent are both here from MG&E. They're environmental and sustainability program managers. Unfortunately, our friend couldn't join us from Kohl's. Lindsay, she had a death in her family she had to attend to. So thank you to Michelle Miller for stepping in for us today. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer for Appian. And then we also have Roxanne Sheriff here today. She is the Senior Account Manager from Datamoran. So welcome to our panelists. I'm going to invite them to turn on their cameras. I'm going to go ahead and pin them, and I'm going to hand it over to Tom to start the discussion.
Thanks, Jesse. When we designed the session, we were looking to explore the overlap between sustainability and ESG. That's still an important component of this webinar, but our timing with this webinar became ideal when the Securities and Exchange Commission published its proposed rule for requiring public companies to disclose how their operations impact the climate or the risks that they might face in a climate changed world. That was published March 21st. So we're still in that 60-day comment period, and we don't know what the final rule is going to look like. But regardless of what modifications are made, the rule is going to be a catalyst for major change for all businesses. The backdrop for this rule is the rise in importance of ESG data as sustainability professionals. And it's a field that I played in for decades. You started out being project focused, then you were told that you needed to better tell your company's sustainability story. And this evolution of sustainability professionals' responsibilities has continued until now, with senior management asking you for guidance on the rising importance of ESG. You find yourself very data focused, probably. I recently read an article that identifies 4 types of ESG data. And those 4 types are right thing data, risk data, revenue data, and finally, regulation data. And if anybody's interested in that article, I can provide the link for it. The new SEC rulemaking raises the stakes on the last one, the regulatory data. Most large companies have yet to get a handle on how to talk publicly about Scope 3 emissions, let alone calculate them accurately or specifically. Yet, as proposed, publicly held companies would be required to disclose greenhouse gas emissions from their value chain if material to its business, or if they had Scope 3 commitment in place. So if you committed to net zero, or to be net zero in a public commitment, you would be required to report under the rule. I think the proposal represents a tipping point for how corporations use information technology, especially carbon software, to manage their sustainability and ESG agendas. It's possible that spreadsheets won't cut it anymore when it comes to collecting, analyzing, calculating, forecasting, and reporting on climate-related data. In response to the new requirements of the rule, sustainability professionals will need to become fluent in ESG data, identifying areas to report on, and setting meaningful targets for improvement. The rule is likely to require that companies treat this non-financial data as they would financial data, with similar rigor and reproducibility. Sustainability professionals, or will you now be called ESG professionals, will need to track and organize data, and that requires both organization around carbon and an appropriate strategy. Sounds like a new assignment for many sustainability professionals in Wisconsin. If you're tasked with overseeing the identification of and collection of ESG data, you might consider using a service provider, things like MSCI or S&P Global, that already rate companies on climate risk and other ESG factors. And now the market is growing, includes a number of software firms like Servest, Envisi, Persephone, Planetly, Watershed, and Workiva that can help with the organization and analysis of ESG data. To help illustrate what's already happening in Wisconsin, within Wisconsin businesses, we've assembled today's panel. I've got several questions prepared for them, and then we hope to have time for your questions. But please hold your questions until the end. So the first question that I have for the panel is, sustainability has become the term used to describe a company's journey toward embracing responsibility for the environment, societal challenges, community, and employees. This was driven by pressure from customers, employees, investors, stakeholders, and stakeholders included regulators and nonprofits and community members. ESG seems largely driven by investors. Is this true for you? And does ESG pressure complement or expand upon the more traditional sustainability pressures? So I'm going to ask Michelle from Appian to take the first crack at answering that question, and then I'll turn it over to Brenda from MG&E.
Everybody hear me okay still? All right. Yeah, so Appian, we are a private equity held company. So for us, the answer is it very much so investor driven? I would say partially for us. So, our investors are interested in ESG, and so we actually recently just changed hands also. So it was very real for us when the rise of ESG and was coming up right when we were actually selling our company to a private equity firm. But in addition to that, our customers, a lot of our customers are publicly traded. So they're part of the SEC, like they would fall underneath that umbrella of modifications and things that they would need to do in the future if it went through. And so they hold us accountable to provide them with what they need to meet their regulatory requirements. So do I see it as investor driven? Yes, but it also our customers, but because they're being driven by it for their purposes. So I very much believe it's still like sustainability. Customers are still one of our biggest stakeholders that drive sustainability within our business. And so they're also driving ESG.
Brenda? You're muted.
That's better. Tom, you touched on it a little bit that sustainability is now evolving into what we're calling ESG. So as sustainability in the past was probably more environmental focused, ESG is embracing all of the different things that make a sustainable business model, like the social and the governance side. So at MG&E, we're a publicly traded company. So, we're watching the SEC rule carefully. But we also have already been doing a lot of the things that are now going to be required to be disclosed. So maybe we weren't as transparent about it in the past, but it's a lot of things that we've been doing already. So we're just having now to become more organized and more transparent with how we're disclosing things. We are getting outside pressure from investors and stakeholders. And they really want us to be able to put this data out there and that they want to be able to find it really easily, which is another challenge. I think for our communications folks, when we tell them, people can't find the information, they're surprised because they say, we already have this out there. How come they can't find it? And so we're having to adjust how we're disclosing things and how we're putting it on our website and where the information is located so that it can be found. But it definitely our shareholders, our finance folks, like our shareholder services group and HR folks, they have a much more active seat with our sustainability at the sustainability table. It's not just the environmental group anymore. We've always included them, or we've thought that we've included them in sustainability, but there's a lot more meetings, there's a lot more collaboration between these groups. It's more public facing and less internal at our company. And we definitely have to collaborate a lot better than we had.
Thanks. I'm guessing that most of our audience considers themselves sustainability professionals. What additional skills or experiences will they be required to have to become ESG professionals? I'll ask Roxanne maybe to weigh in on that to begin with, and then maybe ask Jean to comment from MG&E's perspective.
Thanks, Tom. And I just want to thank you all for hosting this conversation. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with these distinguished panelists who are leaders in sustainability, and as we call it now, ESG. So, I think, what I can share with the group on the call today in terms of how to become, quote, an ESG professional is really lean into the skill set you have around collaboration and communication, because I think that's really of utmost importance as there is a lack of standardization. There's almost a lack of structure in how to address sustainability from within an enterprise. So I'll also add, as a account manager who works with clients at companies that leverage technology to do something, a traditional materiality assessment no longer serves, right? How do you capture more information that is data driven to build the case around whatever your ESG strategy is? So in addition to kind of seeing yourselves as chief translation officers, and again, leaning into those communications skills you have to bridge that divide between sustainability and risk, sustainability and finance, I think also, looking to technology and sort of data-backed insight to substantiate and sort of accelerate the sustainability goals that you have as well.
Thanks. Jean.
Sure. I think we've touched on some of these things. I think you made a very good point, Tom, that it's an evolution. So we may have started as environmental professionals in this field and have shifted into sustainability, and ESG is just one more evolution of that sustainability piece. Things that come to mind for what, I think Brenda and I have been experiencing over the last few years as we've shifted into this ESG framework and thought. Data is a big thing, and I'm talking about data beyond what you turn into regulators, how you track that data, what your baselines are for that data. Transparency, as Brenda mentioned, is huge. Being able to shift and then being able to, I'd say, form tighter internal collaborations with your internal teams. In the past with sustainability, we may have reached out to some of these teams once or twice a year to get feedback and make sure our messages were aligned. And now we're collaborating with them monthly. So that has changed significantly in the last, I'd say, 24 months. We are talking to our shareholder services person, our finance people, our HR people on a monthly basis in regular meetings to make sure that all of our messaging matches. And the messaging is very important because there is an expectation that what you're disclosing is transparent and it's auditable, and you potentially might need to move into third-party verification to kind of meet some of these, what ESG ranking agencies think as like a baseline sustainability approach. So it is shifting. I think that we're sitting in on a lot of webinars, and I think that I've read our proxy statement and some of the stuff that we've sent to the SEC much more in the last 6 months than I have for the rest of my career. And I've been in this business for 22 years. So I do think you really are, it's going to be a lot tighter communication and collaboration than what you may have experienced even under sustainability.
Thanks, Jean. Bob Willard, who's a longtime friend of the Sustainable Business Council and actually spoke at one of our conferences not that long ago, and also is an international sustainability expert, recently wrote that the term ESG has evolved to ESG risk and is used to address risks to the company from external pressures, climate change, discrimination, etc., and also internal threats. So both external and internal threats, supply chain disruption, investor pressure to decarbonize, etc. Is your company's use of ESG mainly in the risk assessment and analysis area? Roxanne, let me let you start off, and I think everybody's going to weigh in on this question.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I'll again, sort of from within my vantage point of working with a variety of companies across industries, certainly I think, because of that investor pressure, because of that, new regulation, most recently, as somebody has pointed out, Brenda, the SEC climate rule, it is definitely about risk. I think we're seeing, those companies that are looking more around the opportunity side. So, when you go through the exercise of identifying those risks, there's also the flip side of kind of where the the value can be created, either through sort of brand recognition, or again, just any mitigation of risk within the supply chain, as one example. So certainly, I think we're seeing a shift to more of the opportunity, but absolutely would want to hear more from Jeannie and Brenda on this.
Michelle, you want to sort of weigh in?
Yeah, so for Appian, for us, the risks and opportunity have always gone hand in hand. But with some of the investor talk going on, we have started to view it maybe under the risk lens more so than we did in the past. So when we're talking about climate change, maybe when we were looking to reduce our energy consumption and switch over to more greener technologies, it might have been around, well, because that's the right thing to do. But now maybe some of the conversations have switched to, well, our climate change actions, we have a huge risk there because of future carbon tax or cap and trade, model. What is our risk to our business if we don't start making some of those changes? So I think it's opened the eyes of maybe others in the business to understand those risks is how we're framing it. Especially on the supply chain side too, you mentioned that as a risk. If we are partnering with the wrong type of suppliers, that opens up a huge liability for us. Having our name dragged through with theirs if one of our suppliers turns out to be not doing something great. So having a lot more scrutiny on who we decide to partner with and bring into our value chain. So I definitely think it's still a risk and opportunity because we are always looking to have that brand recognition, be a top class when it comes to sustainability and be doing the right things, even if there's not any type of risk involved with it. It's more just a benefit and again, doing that right thing. But I think it's opened up more doors for conversations within the company to start having ESG risk be kind of be a lens to look through. One other thing I want to say. So the ESG risk, how we've been kind of talking about it too, is future-proofing our business. So making sure that we continually stay relevant to our customers, to our employees, and to our community. And so future-proofing is kind of a term that we've been using.
Oh, that's great. Jean.
Yeah, I like the future-proofing term. I like that. I think that this is a good distinction. And I think it is something that I wouldn't say we're thinking ESG risk is the main part of it, but it is a much bigger piece than what we were looking at under sustainability. And I think that sustainability folks need to be considering that as they pivot to ESG, that business risk is a larger piece of that pie when you're looking at sustainability through that lens, because it is investor risk and it's risk to the business. And along those lines, it's something that you're going to have to look at from a transparency standpoint, even if it isn't something you're doing right now. A couple of things that we're seeing from agencies that are rating us under ESG is what our C-suite and what our board knows and how much they actively manage our business risks and how transparent we are about how that structure is set up in our company. So if I'm speaking on something, saying our company is doing this, does our board know that we're doing this? And does our board understand the risks involved in the business decisions that we're making? And they want to be able to make that connection. The other thing, I just sat in on one of the ranking agencies had a seminar yesterday, and I sat in on it. And one of the things that stuck in my mind is they gave an example of two things that I thought were interesting. One was controversy. So if you're a company that is managing risk and you're not disclosing that much, you might get drawn into this anyways, because ranking agencies are looking at controversies that are in the public sphere, and they're ranking you based on those controversies. So if you haven't decided to go out and disclose, they're going to make those decisions for you and put some ranking numbers around whether you've had injuries or product issues, or you were involved in some type of dispute. That's all coming out, and they're analyzing that external to your company. So if you're not talking about it internally, it's still being talked about externally as a risk for your company. And the second thing they talked about, they gave an example of palm oil use in companies. And if you've looked at your materiality and you've decided palm oil use, if you're a company that makes food, isn't a big risk, that may be something they consider a risk. And so it's an external measurement of what they've determined is a risk for your company because they feel like that's too much of your product, or for the size of company you have, you're using way too much palm oil. It's already a controversy. And now 50% of your products have them in there. So I thought that was an interesting thing to think about in this arena when you're talking about risk, is it's not just what you internally have determined is your risk, but it's also what rating agencies and investors have said is a risk to your organization and your way of doing business.
Thanks. Jesse, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you and I were talking and you're getting a lot of questions on risk now also, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just to add to what everyone's saying, that previously risk wasn't as much a part of the conversation as it is now, which is just sort of reiterating the obvious. But I think folks are really starting to understand that by not paying attention to sustainability or ESG, there are risks even associated with losing business, right? Like losing primary customers, or really that's the largest risk I think that I'm hearing. Several private companies that we work with are having meetings with their largest customers who are asking them what are their plans around sustainability. And so, we have several folks coming to us that are saying, oh, I think it's time to pay attention to this. So that's what I'm hearing.
Is risk the new materiality? I mean, I think materiality was kind of the issue that sort of showed up on a lot of businesses' radars over the last couple of years. Is that being replaced now with risk? And Jesse, I guess I'll ask you to sort of reflect on that.
Yeah. Yeah, Roxanne, I'd love to hear your point on this. Honestly, I don't think it's being replaced. I think it's just in addition to. So it's an expansion of the thinking. I think materiality is still a great way that businesses can prioritize and gather information about what matters the most to their stakeholder group. And that's really informative information. And that's also, driving the risk conversation beyond just the metrics conversation.
Okay. Michelle, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was just going to speak on when you're saying customers being kind of one of the key risk factors, as employees is another one too, especially with talent and attraction and retention everywhere. Every company is being hit hard. So not staying relevant and modernized in your work practices, you really run the risk of not being able to attract or keep people, which, if you don't have the key people you need to run and grow your business, that's, maybe not as big as customers, but it's still a really huge piece of, you need people, you need good people that want to be in the workplaces to drive forward your what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I actually, if I can jump in on the details of Michelle, because I really did appreciate sort of your comment on how, the risk of ESG really does open the door, I think, for a company to reflect and reimagine the strategy in a more integrated way. Because, when you are going through a materiality assessment, which at this point, every company should be doing that. And there is, more scrutiny on actually what that process is. And again, sort of within, my experience at Data Moran, having, more information, more stakeholders become a part of that process. You're really raising awareness around, yes, the risks, but also the opportunities that have kind of been, in this conversation of where a company needs to, find direction is really valuable. So I just wanted to chime in on that as a materiality expert.
Thanks. So hopefully we've not frightened the audience, but for those of you that are thinking, gosh, I might need to start thinking more about this, I want to ask a question about what tools are available, so what you could, where you could start. Brenda, you want to sort of take the first shot at talking about tools that are available for folks that are worrying about this?
Sure. So I don't think there's any kind of magic bullet or magic button that you can push that will just give you the answers. Every company is going to need to go through and do a careful evaluation. So since MG&E is a publicly traded company, Jean touched on this, we get rated no matter what. If we don't answer their questionnaire, we're still going to get a rating, and it's probably going to be pretty bad. Even if we think we're doing well and we think we've got the information out there, if we're not answering those questions exactly in the wording and in the way that they've wanted you to answer them, we might get a poor score in their ratings. So what we've done is use some of those ratings agencies' grades or the way that they've graded us, and taken a look at their questions and trying to see what things are they missing from us. What things do we need to improve on? What things need to be more transparent? And so that we've been using those rating agencies as a tool. So, you know, I guess MG&E was a little reluctant to jump into the reporting, the formal reporting sphere. And in the beginning, we were sort of using our general corporate sustainability report, and that was our public submission. But now we're seeing that we do have to get into things like CDP and some of the other reporting agencies and other templates that are out there. So, you know, that was one of our first steps, was just looking at those rating agencies' questions and seeing what we were deficient in. Another thing that we've been using is the IPCC reports. The IPCC report will give you a long list of different risks, and they organize it by sector. So like for us, it's the energy sector, or by region, and what types of risks do we need to be concerned about in North America or in the energy sector. And so we can use the IPCC report to see what things we should be mentioning in our risk disclosures.
Roxanne, you want to take a crack at answering it from your kind of a little higher perspective?
Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate that for right now, a lot of companies, you know, the priority has been sort of internal data management. And, you know, again, how do you share that information with those, you know, external stakeholders like ratings and rankers, right? Or sort of, you know, how do you, you know, continue to build the narrative, not just in your annual K, but, you know, outside of that. I'm sure we could probably crowdsource some reporting softwares. You know, from this call, it would actually be really interesting to hear from the audience what you've maybe looked at or are currently using in terms of reporting this information. Yeah. At Datamoran, we really bring the external lens of the data. We really do feel sort of, you know, kind of focusing on the company impact out as much as that out in is really key.
Thanks. The next question I have, and it's kind of for everyone, what are the current ESG questions that are on your radar? Is it human rights? Is it diversity, conflict, minerals, climate? You know, what's showing up? Michelle, you want to take first crack at answering that?
Yeah, so supply chain risk and talent are the two biggest things, which, you know, I attended a leadership conference, and we had all the manufacturing businesses together, and we unanimously said that those two are, for manufacturers, the two biggest pieces right now is supply chain risk and just having good people in your businesses to move forward. But I mean, so the three you mentioned, human rights, diversity, and climate, but those are also part of you know, part of our strategy for moving forward in sustainability and ESG. You know, we're trying to make strides in addressing climate, like any other business, because we know it's a risk, a future risk to us. You know, diversity, making sure that we're working to engage our communities to make, so we're in Appleton, Wisconsin, making Appleton, Wisconsin as a whole more diverse, so that we have a talent pool that's diverse to pull from, is a big thing. So we're trying to do a lot more with our community to improve in the area, and then human rights in our supply chain. So, you know, here being in a Wisconsin, the United States have pretty low risk for human rights issues, but in our supply chain, it's huge because we are a global, we do supply globally. So that would be some hot button topics that we have in our roadmap, and we have a pretty good lens on what we need to do in those areas to strengthen and de-risk.
Brenda, how about from MG&E's perspective?
Sure. Yeah, the human rights policy has been important for us, and that was one thing we found, that you should really have a very formal human rights policy and have it publicly available so that everyone can find it very easily. And the diversity question also. But one of the main things that we're seeing going forward is that folks are going to start to need to calculate their scope 3 emissions, including not just their emissions, but also reduction targets for their scope 3 emissions. And if people aren't familiar with what that means, scope 3 is basically the activities that are outside of the control of your organization. So for example, for MG&E, it would be everybody who uses our natural gas and the emissions that result from folks who use our natural gas. So, how does MG&E have control over that? How can we set a target to reduce the emissions from a product that we sell? That's a challenge for us, and that's going to be something that we'll have to tackle. Another issue that's going to be important is supply chain, which Michelle mentioned. People want to know if you're managing your supply chain, if you're managing your suppliers and your contractors. Are you working with suppliers who have good policies in place, and including safety policies? And for us as a subcontractor, we hire a lot of subcontractors for our work around the community, and we want to make sure that we're hiring contractors that have a good track record, that are doing the environmentally responsible thing, and that they have a good safety program. Also, how much are you spending with diverse suppliers, and also how close to home are your suppliers? Trying to make the effort to make sure you're working with local suppliers, which is another way of reducing your scope 3 emissions if you're not having to have transportation costs and emissions from transportation costs for your products. So those are kind of the things that are on our radar.
Jesse, are you hearing anything in addition to those from folks that are talking with you?
I think that they really hit on the big ones. I mean, we sort of have water as an area of expertise, so we do, hear and work with companies that are, might have a water risk in their business, whether it's through the product that they make or the process that they make. So I think that continues to be one that's top of mind for those that water is material to. And then, yeah, I mean, I think really the greenhouse gas conversation is another thing we get a lot of questions about right now.
Yeah.
And if I can actually chime in as well, Tom, because and I'm sure, as folks on the call know, many of these issues are interrelated. Climate is a social issue. I think one thing that maybe we can all look to is also biodiversity, because that is really emerging and clearly a systemic risk, just as climate has been. I mean, here in the US, we're going to be seeing more guidance from regulators on diversity and human capital management. But in terms of what's kind of next, right, is the issue around nature and how do we preserve and protect our ecosystems. And just to kind of bolster that is this task force of nature-related risk disclosure, which is very much modeled after the TCFD, which is really the crux of what the proposed rule from the SEC is on. So definitely check that out. I'll put the link in the comment box, and obviously feel free to reach out to me to talk more about this. But last point is definitely look over the climate rule, consider talking to your teams about submitting some sort of comment, even if it's not within sort of the length and detail that maybe you would aspire to, but certainly on points of scope 3 and other phase and periods that would be of interest to the company, definitely consider submitting a comment.
Thanks. Let me ask, Michelle was a welcomed addition to the panel. And Appian is a privately held company, as she mentioned earlier. And you did cover this a little bit, Michelle, why Appian is kind of on the cutting edge of the ESG work. But can you talk just a little bit more for those in the audience that are not in publicly held companies, why they might need to pay more attention than they thought they needed to this ESG area?
Yeah, so from the standpoint of your customers, definitely you should already be in tune with what their requirements might be coming out of this SEC ruling, and being aware, because their scope 3 emissions that are going to report, that's you. So you're going to have to provide data if you haven't been able to in the past. So understanding that relationship and being in tune with what the impact you could be because of your customers if they're publicly traded. But on the investor side, especially so for Appian, so we're private equity, so we're looking to grow and then potentially be, bought again by another private equity firm. So when it comes to ESG, having less risk, in ESG means that your selling modifier, meaning how much more you can be sold for, can be affected by whatever those risks could be. So if they see a risk that you have no plan to address, that could affect what your modifier is for the next sale of your business. It can make certain investors turn away if you have no policies around certain topics that they deem to be high risk. So many investors are also requiring private equity companies to do ESG assessments of their businesses before they'll even think about getting in the conversation of investing. So they'll want to see, have you had a third party come in, and do an assessment and giving you results, and what are you doing to improve on those results. So just being aware of if that's something, as like I said, it might be specific to Appian because we have a certain type of flow we're kind of going with now with being private equity, but it's something to definitely consider as you're moving forward.
Yeah, thanks. So Jesse, I'm going to sort of turn it over to you just for the sort of sum up, bring this together before we open it up for questions. What have you heard, and what kind of direction would you provide to the audience?
I think this conversation is so timely, and I appreciate all the panelists' perspective. If you do have questions, please go ahead and type those in the chat now. We will have time to address questions. A couple of things I wanted to say is, as somebody who's been working in sustainability for a really long time, I love seeing what's happening in terms of ESG. And one of my personal opinions is that it's actually in a way a better word for sustainability, because it describes what we're talking about, right? Sustainability, it means so many things to so many people, but when we say environmental, social, and governance, we know what we mean. And so I sort of like this evolution, and to, a lot of what Brenda and Jean talked about, that's the evolution of our work as sustainability professionals, is having this broader lens, which is welcomed because we've been trying to collaborate across our organizations for so many years. And now we're finally being asked to have a seat at the table, and we're ready for it, right? I've talked to a few folks sort of lovingly laugh about it, saying, yeah, I'm so glad you have that idea that we should do that, because I've been saying that for 10 years, right? So I think it's a welcomed evolution, and I like the addition of the risk in addition to sort of, the social and governance lens of it. I think it really is the direction that sustainability professionals are going. And then, of course, it depends on how a company is organized. You need to make sense of how that will play out or be structured inside of your company. There's, of course, nuances across the board. So I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to say. Yeah, Roxanne's posted a lot of great things in the chat here. I've been capturing those. I'll also send those out with a recording afterwards. But audience, what are your thoughts and questions? What are you seeing and feeling in your world around ESG right now? I don't see anything in the chat, but if anybody's brave and wants to come off and share, please do.
I'll go ahead and ask a question, just because it's taking me so long to write the question that I don't think I'll be able to get it all written, if that's okay with you, Jessie.
Of course, Susan, please.
Thank you. So I think I was really interested. I think, Brenda, it was you who was talking about scope 3 emissions. And I've been really thinking about this in terms of, for companies that do who are wholesalers. So you have the producer who's, or like in terms of fuel, there's a company that's doing like extraction and so forth, and then they're selling it. Maybe a wholesaler takes that and transports it, and then eventually it goes to a location where a consumer would purchase it, and then be the burner of those emissions, right? That's where the emissions are combusted. So for the consumer, it's their scope 1. For the producer who creates the original product, it's their scope 3. And I've been thinking a lot in terms of, for that wholesaler, it's their scope 3 on one hand, but now you're like multiplying exponentially all the scope 3 emissions. And that's been the whole crux of the conversation about scope 3 and how difficult it is to actually quantify scope 3 emission. Is this kind of duplication and addition of all these scope 3 emissions. So I was just wondering about your thoughts about that, because it also seems to me with the SEC rule that the general thought on the street is it's going to be subject to some kind of court challenge around scope 3. And so really that's a question for anybody out on this panel, but I'm curious about your thoughts about just this whole idea of really doing this scope 3 accounting.
So I'll take a stab at it. So scope 3 emission accounting is really hard.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of guidance out there, and maybe you're familiar with it. And I think there's a lot more guidance coming out. And so we have just been reading it, and there's not a standard way that everyone does it. And so what we do in the utility business is we do a lot of benchmarking with our peers. And so we'll all get together twice a year and we talk about, how do you do it? How do you do it? And we kind of just try to make sure that we're using a consistent methodology. And you can look at the greenhouse gas protocol and go in there and look at the guidance documents. And I think you're right that there's everybody's scope 3 emissions or somebody else's scope 1 emissions. So yeah, there is a little bit of double counting. It's a little bit deceiving, but you have to, as a company who sells energy like MG&E, we do have some responsibility for what we're putting out there into the world. And it's natural gas is going to be a very large part of our scope 3 emissions. And it's a challenge for us to try to figure out how do we set a target around that, and with our existing business plan. And I think all the different utilities are going to have that challenge, and manufacturers as well. They're also going to have that challenge when they create a product. It's sort of the circular economy. How does your product, what is the end life of your product? And people need to start thinking about that. I don't know if I answered your question, but
well, I'm wondering, how do you, I don't know if you sell to like wholesalers who then pass your product along, but pardon?
Yeah, we don't actually sell to wholesalers.
Oh, okay.
But we buy a certain amount of our energy from the market, but we don't sell it to wholesalers ourselves.
Yeah, and if I
Okay,
could
good.
add, we kind of do act that way as a local distribution company. We don't make the natural gas. It's something that comes into our city gate and then leaves to our customers. So we get, we're looking at the scope 3 from our suppliers who have produced it and brought it to us. And we're looking at the scope 3 of our customers. So we do kind of act like, not exactly a wholesaler, but we're almost just passing it on. But one thing, and I think it is frustrating, but one thing I do think that as a company you can consider under scope 3 is it's a way to look at who your supplier is. For us, for natural gas, we might not have huge options in that regard, but who your supplier is, and then you can't really externalize some of the environmental issues around your product. And so there is going to be double counting, but if you can look at how you would influence that scope 3, that's what I think they're trying to get at is I can't say, oh, I don't do anything because I just passed it through. I have to look at, well, who am I buying this from and what are they doing with it when they have it? And then how am I selling it out and what does it look like when it leaves my site? So it is interesting because it's a number that is going to be double counted and triple counted, but it's a reflection on business choices, I guess, is kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, Jean, I was just going to add to that. I think it's such a good question, Susan, and I think it's great that we're talking about it because, just like when we were starting scope 1 and scope 2, there's things that we need to learn and we'll make adjustments along the way. But to the point that we made earlier about the data helping make decisions for the business, I think that's one of the primary tools that scope 3 will allow companies to do. So if they have a supplier that has a really large greenhouse gas, footprint, but a supplier so they're making a decision between A and B, but A can say, we're this much more efficient and we use this much less emissions, then that allows the company to make a better and more informed decision from a sustainability and likely a risk standpoint as well. So I think it's, thinking a little broader about why we're collecting the data in the first place, and then all the different ways we can use them. So I wasn't sure if somebody wanted to chime in, but
thank you, everybody. Really appreciate everybody's responses.
Michelle, let me give you an opportunity just to weigh in. How are you trying to get your arms around scope 3 emissions? Are you asking for information from your customers at this point?
So from our customers, no. So we're likely going to be framing it on a cradle to gate standpoint because we have a lot of extra things that happen to our product before it actually gets to like the actual usage side of it, because we are a label manufacturer and it gets added with a liner and adhesive and other materials. And so our piece would eventually be with something that would, be pulled apart and then go into certain endways. It's conversations and collaboration that we want to be a part of, but our project that we have this year right now is making a determination on how we want to go about scope 3 data gathering. Do we want to, work with and purchase our own licensing for LCA systems and start just gathering it on our own by contacting suppliers and getting that information and then getting proxy data for whatever gaps we have? Because again, we have some global suppliers that it's not always easy to get data from them. Or are we going to build a custom tool and have a contract with a company to help us gather that data? Or are we just straight up going to use, proxy data altogether based on the types of chemistries that we use? Our biggest components for our products are paper and chemicals. So, so we have some opportunities to use groups and families and data sets from chemical companies that have been doing LCI gathering for a long time, that we can contract and out and buy those data sets and use that instead of getting very specific to our actual suppliers. So we have a project this year to determine how we want to do it, what's going to be the best fit for what our customers need, which that's who ultimately, we need to get the data for. That's the immediate need, is because they've said, hey, you should expect an ask this year. Whether that's through the EcoVadis survey that we fill out for some of our customers or through the CDP. They're considering the climate module on there. They said expect an ask this year. So we're gearing up trying to make that decision on what's going to be the best route to do it. Now we're going to be a little bit behind and, we don't know if we'll be able to answer them right away this year, but, so right now we don't have any scope 3 and that's what we're doing this year is trying to determine the best route to do it. And the comment on the, being concerned about, is it being double counted? Whether or not somebody else is looking at it too, you have to just really frame it on your view and what your value chain is, and is it a risk to you? Because if it, like Jesse was saying, if it's a risk, you have one that, one material that is going to be coming from further away, more greenhouse gas emissions, you need to really frame it for specific to your business. Is it a more of a risk? Is it more greenhouse gas that we're putting out? Is it a higher number that we're going to end up giving to our customers that's going to reflect badly? Or into the future, if we start doing some of those cap and trade or having a carbon tax, it's all a risk. And so whether or not it's being double counted is, you really just have to frame it on if it's a risk, it's important to manage it.
I think we've got time for one more question if anyone wants to be brave enough to ask. Well, Jesse, you want to sort of close us down and send us on our way?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So again, thank you everyone for being here. I remembered the other point that I had, which was sort of in the lines of risk, but it also, I just think this is good food for thought for maybe a smaller private company. Because I get the opportunity to talk so many businesses, I do often hear that companies are sometimes collecting data on their suppliers strictly from their website, right? And or if they're looking for a new supplier for a new product or, for whatever reason, they often will start with an assessment on their website. And if there's no sustainability presence, that oftentimes they will be overlooked. And so we've actually heard that from a couple of clients that they have overlooked certain suppliers because of the lack of sustainability presence that they had. And so I think I just wanted to make that point from that risk point in the conversation that if a company is looking to grow, that sustainability can give them a new access to new markets, but also that they could be losing business they didn't even know they could have, right? And that's definitely not me advocating for go put something around sustainability on your website. That's more me, advocating for considering an integrated strategy that we talked about when you're looking towards business in the future for, the next 10, 20, 30 years. So I guess I'll sort of end with that point and thank all of our speakers. Just a reminder on the date of our conference, save the date for November 16th. You can find all the other upcoming events on our website. And if you aren't currently a member, we invite you to join us in the membership program. So thank you to everyone for your time today. All right, thank you. Yeah, Susan, I will go ahead and send the recording out to everyone that was here and everyone registered really. So those that weren't able to make it can have it. And then it also goes in the member platform. So it will be there as well. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.